Hi everyone, I'm Ankita from NASCOM. I also have my colleague Shreya who will support us in having a seamless session. The title for today's webinar is Do Not Listen to Your Customer. Really, seriously, all right, like yours, my curiosity level is also very high right now. So I have Yogesh Rao, VP Product at United Health Group, who will tell us why we shouldn't listen to our customer. Yogesh has been a constant support to this NASCOM product skill pillar and is with us since its beginning. His last session too was a great one where he spoke on product management career path. I will share the YouTube recording link over the chat window. Before I hand over to him, please ask questions anytime during the session. Yogesh will cater to them at the end. Do not forget to leave your feedback to help me better my future sessions. Welcome, Yogesh. Over to you. And good morning, Yogesh. It should be 5:36 a.m. in Minneapolis right now.
It's totally my pleasure to be here, Ankita. Okay, so good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be addressing another NASCOM event. Don't listen to your customers. There is a slight play with words here, and we will soon see what it is. So, a quick introduction before we get started. I've been with I've been in product management for about 16 years now. And prior to the organization where I currently work, United Health Group, which is a Fortune 5 organization and America's largest healthcare org. I used to work for Yahoo, spent 3 years there in product management, which was more of a B2C setting, and prior to that at Novell, close to about 16 years in enterprise software product management. My passion is running. I've been running for a few years now. I've done a few full and ultra marathons. In 2011, we had a group of us in Bangalore running 12 marathons that year in several cities. And quite an unforgettable experience. My hope is to repeat it again. Let's go to the next slide here, Shreya. So, quick public service announcement. This whole product movement in India is quite nascent. And then there is a bunch of us, including Ankita and Shreya, who are on this call from NASCOM, who have been working tirelessly to run this movement called as India Productified. We do consider it our passion, our goal to see the product industry within India grow. Just to give you some statistics here, Indian IT industry as a whole generates about $200 billion. This is the entire industry. There are hundreds and thousands of IT workers. There are any number of software companies that are out there that deliver services. And services is a great start. It has given India that much needed impetus to build its human capital, its workforce. But today, for us to go from being a $200 billion to a $500 billion IT industry, we have to scale non-linear. We have to scale exponentially, and that scale cannot come through services, right? Where we for generating every additional $40 or $50 per hour, you need to hire one more additional person. Unless your existing workforce works more hours, you cannot generate that kind of revenue. Products can. So a company like Alphabet, Google's parent, generated $148 billion. That's 148,299. That's in million. So they generated a tremendous amount of money with just 107,000 employees. That's their headcount. How can that scale be possible? That is possible only with products which give you that kind of non-linear growth. So I request all of you to join this movement. It's India Productified. We are running a whole bunch of unconferences. There are several other events like workshops. And this is like truly a democratic movement, which means like it is by the people, it's for the people and of the people, which means like you would need to give in as much as you take out from it, right? So that was my public service announcement. And the other, of course, these are like very interesting times. I hope all of you are staying safe and healthy. They say adversity brings out character, it reveals character, it does not build character. So this is a time when I hope all of you are seizing those opportunities. There is a plenty of opportunities out there. Last month there was a really good session by Rekha Menon and Narayana Hridayalaya's CEO, Dr. Devi Shetty, which I found really very interesting. So please do get involved. These are interesting times. Don't look at these as like weird times. These are like times of opportunities. Okay. All right, Shreya, let's move to the next slide here. So many of you who have stepped into this role of product management. Okay. So let's talk shop now. You are going through a couple of things. Okay. So next two slides, I'm sure you'll be able to relate to what I'm going to tell you. So let's go to the next slide here, Shreya. Reality number one, right? Everyone says product manager, you are the CEO of your product, you drive all the decisions. When I became a product manager initially, I thought, hey, I'm the CEO of my product, which means I make all my decisions, right? Wrong. What it really turned out to be was like, hey, I'm clueless. I don't know what to do, right? I'm in this new role. I don't know what this new role entails. I'm stuck here, like in fact, I'm going through a rut right now. I was an engineer. Life was good. Things were, someone told me what to do. I had to write software and suddenly I'm like clueless. I don't know what to do now. So if you are going through that kind of a scary moment every day, it's okay. It will pass. Okay. So just wanted to kind of start there. Number two, everyone says listen to your customer, listen to person ABC, listen to this, listen to that, listen. Like, okay, what does that even mean? And for many of you who are coming here from India, like especially working in a multinational setting, this can be a little daunting. What does that even mean? Like, do I just listen and parrot? So the next slide here will give you an idea of how I felt. I hope many of you are, not in this boat. But if you are, don't feel alone. It's okay to be there. Many of us who kind of move to this role, feel this way. So if you can relate to this, let's look at like what did I learn from this? Okay. So here is the punchline. Here are the two things I want you to take away from this presentation. What do I say? What do I mean when I say don't listen to your customer? What I'm telling you here is don't listen, understand. Okay. So there are so many of us who listen just for the sake of listening, but we are not truly understanding. Okay. Understand what your users really want. Don't just listen to them. Okay. There are going to be avenues where you can listen to them. If you just listen to them and give them what they want, you will just be giving them what they want, right? The second thing is there is a very clear distinction. Can you stay on the previous? Yeah, thanks. So there is a very clear distinction between customer, user, and market. Okay, and this is not just for those of you who are in B2C. This is also equally applicable to those of us who are in a B2B setting. Okay. So typically, what do we mean by these three words, right? Let's look at this. Like customer normally is the person who cuts your paycheck, right? This is the person who's giving you your income, the top line in your income statement. So in product management lingo, we call this person as buyer persona, right? This is the person who's actually paying for your product, right? This is where your business model works. The second interesting persona you have here is the user persona. Okay, so typically you would go with one or two users and say like, hey, here is my user, right? But then there is a third element here, which is the most important element, which is your market. Okay. So what you really need to be doing is understanding your market, not understanding your user or your customer. Okay. You need to have a user who is hopefully a representative of your market. And in the product management lingo, we call this the user persona. But that user persona, when aggregated over 1,000 times or 100 times or 1,000,000 times, should become your market. Now, how does this work in a B2B environment? In a B2B environment, you typically have your buyer persona, who is your procurement team in your target organization. Yes, that person needs to find you easy to do business with. Okay, if you are not easy to do business with, that person will not work with you. If they are willing to work with you net 30 or net 60, work with them with net 30. Be okay to like work with 30 and 60 days. Just make sure you're working with your vendors and you're somehow able to manage that cash cycle, right? You need to be easy to work with, but don't ignore your users. If you ignore your users and create bad experiences for them, they will start recommending that we discontinue your product to the buyer, okay, to the procurement team. And your procurement team, no matter what you do, they will not agree to continue to do business with you, okay? So ignore your users at your own peril. So it doesn't matter whether it is B2B or B2C. Please make sure you're listening and you're understanding, more importantly, your market, what their needs are, and catering to those needs. Okay. So let's move to the next slide here. So here is another very important punchline from this presentation that I would like all of you to take away. Okay. So there are three mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive ways to understand your market. Okay. Number one, you speak with your market. Go to your go to conferences, go to places where your markets come together, talk to them, talk to leads, talk to prospects. You can have customer advisory boards. You can have focus group discussions for those of you who are in B2C. You can bring your user personas. You can speak with your market. Okay. The second option that's available is you speak with the people who in turn speak with your market, which means you go to your internal organizations like sales, support, field marketing. All these are groups who are typically out there in the marketplace. Don't ignore support. Support is a very, very important area for those of you who are in product management. Sales and field marketing, yeah, but support, there is a very clear currency that you can trade with them. So these are like groups that you can speak with, who are in turn speaking with your market and turn out to be like great input. The third option is to use data and analytics. Okay. So there are things like sales funnel reports, there are trouble tickets, there are opportunity reports, there are web logs that your web servers are already always generating. There are many, many ways by which you can do your instrumentation and use data and analytics to be another route to your market, to understand another route to understand your market, right? So these are the three ways, like it doesn't matter what new technology emerges. No, it doesn't matter how you do this, but these are the only three ways that at least I am aware of, like in all these years working as a product manager. Okay. So what are some of the pros and cons, like going with each of these approach? What happens when you speak with your market? So in many cases, you will hear people say like, hey, observe your users, see under what conditions they're using your product, see what kind of work environment they have. Do they have photographs of their children sitting next to the computer screen where your product is running, right? But team or folks, like your users are not going to open up their lives to you. You're rarely, if ever, going to get an opportunity to go and see them work. Okay. And remember this, once you start a conversation, they're going to start asking you for things. And guess what? You're committed. You have to deliver it. No matter how terrible an idea it is, right? It's going to be very difficult for you to manage that expectation. You're going to have a tough time telling why it is a bad idea. And trust me, it's a bad idea to tell your customer why their idea is not such a good idea. And if you keep dilly-dallying and not deliver on what they're asking you to do, once you're in that conversation, it's going to be hard. Your customer is always right. Your user is always right. You can't argue with them. So speak with your market, but be very, very careful with that conversation. Make sure you are steering that conversation in a right manner. Prepare for it. If you do go speak with your market, be very careful because you're setting expectations when you speak with them. The second group where you speak with the people who speak with your market, your sales, your support, your field marketing, this is even a more tougher group, right? This group, is your internal group. And the moment you're talking to your sales team, right, like they're listening to you. The moment you say something, you say like, hey, there is this new feature, new function my product will provide. The moment you say it, they're going to be like, okay, when do you think you can deliver it? The next question is, when can you deliver it? And you don't have a time invariably unless you have spoken with your engineering teams. And even if you say something like, like I have to speak with my engineering teams and come back, they're going to nag you. And the moment you say something like mid-August, end August, or, second half of this year, guess what? They're going to write it down in their notebook. You're going to start getting emails. Okay. Again, it's going to be very difficult managing those expectations. So be very sensitive to any dialogue you have with these internal contingent. In many ways, it's actually much more easier to manage your external folks, people who are outside of your organization than the people inside of your organization. Those are more difficult to manage, right? And the other thing is, like, once you speak with the people who speak with your market, right, like they're not going to give you an opportunity to run any kind of experimentation, right? Because the moment you start experimenting, they're going to be like, okay, why do you need to run this experiment? Like, why do you want to treat my customer as a guinea pig? So you're going to get a lot of other pushbacks from them as well, right? And how is it with data and analytics? It's extremely hard, okay? This requires you to bring your brain and your critical thinking. And the most difficult thing to do any day is to bring your critical thinking to your work, right? You'll have to think really very hard. You'll have to establish what are your independent and dependent variables, okay? So any variable that you can control, right? You can set the price of your product, right? You cannot control your cost, okay? And you cannot control whether your market will buy it or not, okay? Simple microeconomics at play there. But you will have to understand what are the drivers of that revenue, of that cost, of that pricing. You'll have to understand what is your competitive pricing. There's a whole bunch of things that happen there. But the beauty is you can experiment. You can set, you can move around with your pricing. You can provide discounts. You can see how many units you are able to move. There's a whole bunch of things that become possible with data and analytics. And the third thing that I wanted to point out over here is the cliche. The moment you say do not listen to your customer, many of you who are in this arena, I'm sure all of you remembered Henry Ford, who said, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have asked me for faster horses, right? So with speaking with your market and speaking with those people who speak with your market, they're going to be asking you for faster horse carriages, okay? Invariably with your market, they're going to say like, hey, I need a horse carriage, right? You speak with the people who speak with your market, they're going to say like, hey, I need that horse carriage and I need it now, right? If you're talking to support, and if you're talking to sales, they're going to be like, hey, I need it and I needed it yesterday. Otherwise, I can't sell this thing. You're going to be killing my quota. Salespeople are going to give you a hard time. Okay. So, both of these are going to be like a here and now, what we need type of ask. Whereas with data and analytics, it gives you that opportunity to start triangulating, or even if there are more variables, you can start kind of closing in on what your market actually needs. Okay. So this is where you start getting some interesting uh, potential opportunities. You can see that, hey, like there is possibility to deliver a car. Okay. But you can't get there straight away. Getting to that idea towards, inferring a car is what your market needs requires a lot of critical thinking. It requires a lot of, uh, you know, uh, coming up with like new product ideas. And I will tell you a little bit about, like what our thinking is, like in terms of getting towards that kind of an inference. Okay. Okay. So let's move to the next slide here, Shreya. So team, like we will be opening up at the end for question and answer. So I've ensured, like that we end up with at least like 15 to 20 minutes there. So I'm sure if there are questions, which I'm sure they are forming in your mind, please write them down. Let's have a good discussion around it. Okay. So kind of, like summarizing that slide, how do you deal with the three different ways that you have for understanding your market needs? Okay. Our best preferred way is to use data and analytics. Now, does that mean you should not speak with your market or speak with those people who speak with your market? Absolutely not. I mean, continue speaking with them, but go to them after you have done your homework. Don't go to them with a empty notepad and say like start writing down what they are asking you for. Okay. So our recommendation here is start with data and analytics. Try some simple experiments, and whenever you're ready to kind of get some additional qualitative information, go to your market and say like, hey, if I launch this particular product, I'm seeing that it doesn't stick. Not many people seem to be attracted towards it. Why is this not an attractive option for you? Okay. So this the first and the second option gives you an opportunity to understand and get the human aspect of why your data is telling you what you tell, right? So I will give you a couple of case studies now where you will see data, and without having that context of the user and the market and the population, that data won't make any sense. Okay. So you need to make sense of the data. That's when you go to number one and number two. Okay. So handle with care, understand, and use the right approach. Now, many of us here in this product management world these days love this new concept called as lean startup. The concept of lean startup has been around for a while now, but in practice, it's extremely hard, very, very hard. And I have discovered this the hard way. And let me share some of my learnings with you. But before we get into my own learnings, what is lean startup? I think it's important for all of us to get grounded on what is lean startup. It's a new way of thinking. Let's go to the next slide here, Shreya. So the person who wrote this book or this whole concept was a guy called Eric Rice. It's not like Eric just came up with this new phenomenon. We've had things like extreme programming, which many consider to be a predecessor to lean thinking. So the concept has been around for a while, but what Eric Rice did is he came up with this word called pivot. Okay, all of you, I'm sure, have heard of the word pivot. We know what it literally means in English. We know what that word literally translates to, and we also know in business lingo we use the word pivot for pivot tables. I'm sure all of you have used pivot tables in Excel, or at least have heard about it. But a pivot in the new world is a change in strategy without a change in vision. Okay. So when someone says like, hey, I'm pivoting my business model, okay, you will hear this in the startup world for those of you who are in B2B. I'm sure it doesn't make sense. You're like, okay, I mean, people are just using this fancy word, right? Like called pivot. But let us see what that word actually means. Let's go to the next slide here, Shreya. So this is what that word pivot means. So if there is a second takeaway you're going to take away from this presentation today, it is lean thinking and it is pivot. Okay. So keep this in your mind and use it generously. Okay. Now you know what it means. So what this means is like at the top left-hand corner of this picture, which is like you guys have seen, I'm sure, any number of SDLCs and process diagrams where there is an enhanced V model, there is a agile model, etc. But at the top of this lean thinking concept is what Alexander Osterwalder, like who created this thing called a business model canvas, came up with, right? So you start off with a strategy. This is a lightweight strategy. This is not strategy as it was, like in the as defined by Michael Porter or some of our other management gurus, where like people would go off to an offsite, spend 1 month coming up with this grand strategy for the year 2020 or 2021. No, this is not what it is. This is a business model canvas, which is like a simple strategy view for what you want to achieve in a release. Okay. So that's how simple it becomes. I'm going to try launching a product. Okay. And here is what I think it should do. Okay. You start with the end in mind. So you sketch out your hypothesis. Okay. So I have copied this particular picture from Harvard Business Review. Um, that there was a beautiful article titled "Why the Lean Startup Changes Everything." I would highly recommend that you folks kind of check this article out in Harvard Business Review. Alexander Osterwalder actually shows you how to finish a business model canvas. So just follow it. It's not rocket science, okay? So the next thing that you do is you come up with that idea. You take that idea further and you launch it. Okay, you basically program. You get your engineers to write the software. It's what we would call as a minimal viable product, an MVP. You launch your MVP. Okay. Now this is where it gets interesting, right? Like many of us in the enterprise world or in the B2B world, we think we get a release done, our job is done. Okay, because we celebrate releases. Beyond release, we don't know what happens to our release. Okay, we do, but we celebrate releases, and release itself is a big thing because most of us are doing 6 month releases, right? Like 6 months, or it takes like 3 months. It's a big deal when we launch something. We are celebrating our launch. But product managers on this call, be cautious. Okay, launch is just the starting point. Now, what happens beyond launch is your testing. Okay, you have those metrics that you kind of started off with in your hypotheses. Okay, you test your launch, see how well it goes, and then you measure it, right? Now, this is where, like it gets interesting. You see whether it is having the desired impact. Remember, we are still at a minimal viable product with this. And this is where you have a very, very important decision to make. Okay, the decision that you make is, should I proceed with this? Is it really working? If it is not working, what do I think will work? Okay, so this is where, like you go with the statement that Eric Rice made, right? You have a change in strategy, but don't change the vision, right? My vision is to make the healthcare system work better for everyone. The strategy that I use for it could be releasing a portal where my patients can log in. Okay. But that patient portal, if it is not working, be ready to change the portal, right? Be ready to change the look and feel of it. Be ready to even scrap the portal altogether if it's needed. Okay. And this is where you do a pivot. You go back to the sketching your hypothesis again and you start doing it again. Like how quickly you can do this is what really matters. So when people tell you like, hey, celebrate your failures, this is what they really mean. Okay. This is where celebrating your failures become real. And this is not an easy concept to implement, team. Okay. Many companies say like, hey, we celebrate our failures. We are very innovative. This is where the rubber really meets the road. If you make a launch and if that launch fails, how many people lose their jobs? If your company is actually setting that precedent, they are not truly innovative. Okay. And doesn't mean that you have to quit your company. But this is where, like we as product managers, we don't give up easily, right? We start changing the culture, right? But a couple of important things that are getting measured these days, especially in the startup world, and you'll see this being mentioned in the Bay Area very frequently. They call it the time to pivot. Okay, how long does it take for me to go from hypothesis to pivot? And this is where your engineering teams become really, really very important. You need to be able to turn things around really fast. You get a solid rockstar engineering team, that launch will happen within 1 or 2 sprint cycles. You'll be able to get it out within like 2 to 4 weeks. If you have a so-so engineering team, they're not motivated, be ready for 3 month cycles, okay? And what comes at the end of it, like you will be doing 4 pivots in a year if you're doing 3 month releases. It's not fast enough. You'll run out of money, especially given an environment where, like you're paying top dollar to your engineers, you will run out of cash. So be ready to pivot very quickly. It is so important. So I personally love the lean startup model, but don't underestimate the cultural change that goes with it. It is not easy, guys. Those of you who are working in large organizations or even medium-sized organizations where you are used to releasing products in 3 to 6 month intervals, don't don't think that you can change to this tomorrow. It's not happening. This will take time. So the good news is that that you can get to this. This these days is considered to be the motherhood and apple pie. Everyone wants to get to this model, but to get there, you will have to slowly start making changes. Okay, you will have to keep working with your engineering leaders. Be respectful of them, because for them, especially for those of you in product management, don't underestimate the engineering changes that are needed here. Okay, so please work with them collaboratively and try to move towards this. So this is the second big takeaway for you. Understand your customers is number one, and number two is it's all about an evolution and not a revolution. Okay, rarely do you come up with a award-winning product in your release number one. It takes time to get there. Okay, and I'll talk about some case studies that will get you there. Let's move to the next slide here, Shreya. Okay, uh, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Peaceful Warrior. I would highly recommend that you watch it. Uh, where I come from in India, in Karnataka, we have a saying, you drink water, it's water. You go to temple, it comes out of a conch shell, it becomes, holy water. So in many ways, right, like you have to actually watch a Western movie to understand the beauty of what our Eastern culture actually gives you. So I have been practicing mindfulness and meditation. I've been trying hard. Not that I've in any case even not even come close to mastering it, but it is really striking how mindfulness is rooted so closely in this beautiful concept, right? So in the movie Peaceful Warrior, which is all about mindfulness and this Eastern concept of meditation, the punchline is there is never nothing going on. There are no ordinary moments. There are never any ordinary releases. Learn from every release. Listen to what happens after your release. Don't think your job is over after you make a release. Okay. So I wanted to kind of put this here because it's important, right? I mean, sometimes you have to watch a Western movie to understand how good or what is the value of what we have in our own hands for those of us who live in India. Let's go to the next slide here, Shreya. Okay, now that you know this, those of you who are in a multinational company, product management, every time we say like, hey, how do I get more user information? How do I get more user knowledge? Three things people will always ask for, right? I've seen this coming up time and again. Give me travel. I want to go to US. I want to go to Europe. I want to see how my users are using the system. Blah blah blah. You don't really need to travel, guys. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, I want to have focus group discussions. Number three, I want to start getting these huge distribution list from Dun and Bradstreet, right? All of these things cost a lot of money. So please don't trouble your boss, okay? There is a lot of good things that you can do without troubling your boss for like a lot of money. Of course, unless your boss has a money tree growing in his backyard, go ahead and get all the travel budget you want, travel as much as you want. But you can travel and you may still find that you're not getting the desired impact, which is to really understand your customer, right? So understanding your market is what you really need to be shooting for. So please, take this learning and stop troubling that poor harried boss. He or she will definitely appreciate you doing a good job without asking for a lot of money. Let's go to the next slide here, Shreya. Okay, so case study number one. I have 3 case studies here, guys. I think I will cover 2 case studies and I will cover the third one if time permits. Okay. So, case study number one, let's go to the first slide here. So, many of us who have been in the enterprise world, have been here for like a few years now. I've been traveling for my companies, so the companies that I've worked for many years. So, this is a product that I have used, an SAP Travel Expense Manager. Some of you may be using Oracle iExpense. Oh my goodness. Many of us who have been engineers in the past, we are familiar with this word called CRUD, which is create, replace, update, and delete, the 4 basic functions of a database. That's exactly what the screen looks like, right? You can create a new line item, you can replace a new line item, update, etc. So here is a classical example of SAP. What is the beauty about SAP? SAP has like a full company model, right? They're able to come in, they can run right from procurement through purchase through sales, they have modules for every element within the organization. But no one module which really pleases the user, which delights the user, right? And somewhere along the way in 2005 or 6, let's go to the next slide here, Shreya. My company implemented a expense management software called as Concur. So if maybe it has not refreshed here on my screen, but on the next slide, I have a screenshot of what Concur looks like. Now, even in early 2000, these folks had managed to bring in every single integration that a typical traveler would need. This was not, somewhere along the way, it had evolved from being an expense management system to becoming a travel booking system. You can actually book travel directly from Concur. They have all kinds of integration with Sabre and with other travel booking systems. They have per diems that are integrated from the system of record. You can use your mobile application to just click a photograph of a bill. It scans it in real time and attaches it to your expense report. So it was a delight to use this. I can't even begin to tell you what a difference it was to go from an Oracle iExpense or an SAP Travel Expense Manager to Concur, right? And very soon, these guys got a reputation as a awesome organization to kind of do business with because users loved them. Users absolutely loved them. And there was a time when Oracle and SAP were just buying up all the companies that were in any kind of ERP, and there was a massive consolidation that happened. Until such times, Concur was doing extremely well. And let's go to the next slide. And here is where Concur finally ended up, guys. Okay. So on the next slide, we have the deal book results. So SAP ended up buying Concur and ended up buying it for $8.3 billion, right? Think about it. That's a lot of money for a travel expense system, right? And on the right hand side of that picture, which has it's not refreshed here on my screen, hopefully it's refreshed for all of you. On the right hand side of that screen is a photograph of the founder, right? Steve Singh, who came from a small village in India, which happens to be in Peshawar today, and first he made his way to Detroit and then to Silicon Valley. Not very well known, is not like Vinod Khosla or some of the other folks, like here who are here in the Bay Area who are known really, really very well. Steve is one of those really silent guys. He doesn't like to make a lot of noise, but he's done extremely well. And this is a classic example of a B2B setting where there was a single-minded focus on the market, on the users of your product. And that user interaction, that delightful user experience led to a beautiful exit for the founder. Okay. Let's go to the next case study here. Case study number 2. Let's go to the next slide here, Shreya. So this is a classical case study, and let me not spend a whole lot of time here. Let's go to the next slide. So anyone who's been through B school, this will be a very familiar case study for you because it pretty much gets quoted, like everywhere there is a strategy class, So this comes from Clayton Christensen and goes back to the days of early 70s when the only steel that came out were these things called I-bars. These were like very, very expensive steel, and the manufacturers of the I-bars, the massive, very expensive steel, didn't notice a trend that was happening. There were these what we call as rebar steel. I have a picture of that in the center, right below the photograph of Clayton Christensen. We use this in India now, right? Like anytime you see any kind of house construction, we use rebar. We don't use I-bars. I-bars in India typically are used for massive construction work, like infrastructure construction work, like metro or any of those subways, right? So what they did not see was this massive improvement that the rebar industry was kind of going through. The quality of the mini mills that produced that rebar got better over a period of time, and the response coming from the I-bar industry was, our the instead of kind of like adopting this new technology or this new method of making steel, they kept focusing on improving the quality of their I-bars, right, and made it more and more complex and more special. And at some point, they're out of business. So don't ignore what your market is telling you, right? Your market is looking for that right place, like your price point and the quality. So value always is delivered, in the form of features, but don't ignore the fact that that value also has a cost attached to it, right? So if your value, the additional features you're offering, if it comes at a prohibitively high cost, that value is not really seen as value by your market at some point, right? And this kind of intelligence primarily comes from data. And the other important learning here, is this pattern repeats time and again. Those of us who have been around in the industry for a few years now have seen what happened to Sun Microsystems, right? Sun was this awesome company founded by Vinod Khosla and Scott McNealy and a few others, the pioneer of the internet era. They were just unbeatable at one point. But what happened was the cost of the PC, or what we would call as Intel machines, Windows running on Intel PCs, the quality was getting better over a period of time. And at some point, there was no difference between having a Intel machine, which costed about $550, $600, and a Sun Microsystem, which was about $2,000 and ran on Unix operating system. So, the game was over, right? So just never ever lose the lose the cost at which you are delivering your value. You may be closely looking only at your competitors, but your competitors and you may not be able to see this new entrant who's coming in with a substitute, and that substitute sometimes ends up, like displacing us completely, right? But then hindsight is 2020. It's easy for me to bring up these samples, and it's very difficult for me to live in the shoes, in your shoes, right? So that's where the Q&A is going to be effective. Okay, so there is another case study, but we have 15 minutes left in the time that we had booked up over here. The third case study was all about a revolution that happened. I'm sure this is fresh in all of your minds. Let's quickly kind of flip through these slides, Shreya. So this is the Arab Spring revolution that happened. The data for this was all over the place. We saw it sweeping through country after country, and what none of us who were in the UGC world, or what we would call as user generated content, right? Like there is a bunch of websites that help you generate your own content, like YouTube or blogs. None of us saw this coming, right? We didn't expect that a revolution would start, right? Because of people being able to express their frustration. A person immolating himself led to, so many dictators falling down. So don't underestimate the power of your market. Your market can make you, your market can break you. And we've seen this pattern kind of playing over and over again. Okay, I'm not going to belabor that point. I think all of you get the idea. We love data. We love lean startup methodology when it comes to getting products out there in the market. So in summary, here are the three important punchlines. Understand your market. Don't just listen to your customers and mindlessly give them whatever they want. In other words, don't just be a parrot. Develop user personas where possible. Not everyone in product management who's around for a while understands what user personas are, but not enough effort is put into this, and not many people see the value in this. Okay, so make sure you have user personas that represent your market, segment your market. Make sure you have a way by which you're actually able to validate your aspirational user persona with reality, right? Back in Yahoo, we ran an astrology product. We had a aspirational user persona. We thought ladies would be very interested in astrology, but what we were surprised by was it was gender neutral, and people above the age of 50 were spending tremendous amount of times on astrology, reading up, like their future, which was like a eye opener. We never thought, that would be the case. Okay, so test your aspirational user persona with the real people who are actually coming in and coming to your product and engaging with your product. Create avenues, channels to receive data points. Focus on the important, but instrument everything, because many cases you don't know the value of something until it is needed. And when you need it, and if it is not instrumented, and if you don't have the data, it is too late, right? So make sure you instrument everything. Don't make sure you have a lot of telemetry going on. Don't underestimate the value of data. Okay. The third important point is be information rich. Don't be data rich. I have a lot of product owners who join my team who come and tell me like, hey, Gartner says this, Forrester says this, and IDC says this. And I always ask them, okay, all of that is fine. Tell me what you think. What should we do, right? So it's interesting, right? Like the moment I ask that question, not many people have a well-formulated idea about what they think we should do. So be information rich, don't be data rich, right? Because I can go do a Google search myself and figure out what these industry experts are telling. Get a coach if you're new to the industry. It's hard getting a coach. Read up the story of Adi Shankara. Like he went in search of a coach for 30 years looking for a good guru. So it's not easy getting the right coach. Make sure you get the right coach. Okay, a right coach will help you really get through those difficult anxiety creating moments. Sometimes you just need someone who can tell you like, take it easy, this too shall pass, right? And most importantly, learn to torture your data, and it will eventually confess. It will give you the information that you're really looking for. Okay. So that was it, everyone. Over to Shreya, Ankita. I'm happy to take any questions that the audience may have.
Sure. Thanks, Yogesh. Let's just begin the Q&A round. So the first question is by Rohit. He's saying, please give an example when a product manager really understood what the user slash customers were saying and found out that the product is not really right for them. Was that product manager able to pivot?
Yes, I have a lot of examples of how product managers have done it. So let me give you two examples, Rohit. First example will be from my experience at Yahoo, working in a B2C environment. We had a product line called as games.yahoo.com, and my good friend Manju, who was the product manager for the games.yahoo.com, what he discovered was that he was not getting as much traction as he should be getting for some of the games. Okay, so if you have engaged with games.yahoo.com, it was a portal where you could go and play backgammon, chess, and there were like a whole bunch of other games, right, like Pac-Man and other things that you could play. What he found was that there were some games that were clicking and doing really very well, and then there were some games that were not doing well at all. Okay, so what we did was we actually had to cut some of those games loose so that we could make progress in some of our other areas. Okay, so if you know how it is to kill a product in any organization, it's damn hard. So we had to go through the process of convincing, like, hey, this needs to be killed. Let's instead, like, make a focused, approach on some of these other games. So Manju went with data. He went all the way up to Marissa Mayer, who was our CEO back then, and was able to convince her that this was the right strategy to take. And there was also thought going around, like, hey, should we even keep games.yahoo.com? And he made one of the best business cases that I've seen for why we had to keep games.yahoo.com, and not only just keep it, but also kind of pivot from there and kind of move upwards. Okay, so that was in the case of B2C, right? Like using solid data to back up a pivot. The second example I'll give you is more from a B2B setting. So we have, like in the company that I'm currently working for, United Health Group, we've had, we have a product that actually is used by a large number of physicians. So we had to make a release in the last 6 months. It would have taken us about 6 months to get that release out. So we had to have discussions with our engineering leadership team to figure out how we could come up with an MVP. Our teams in Hyderabad were able to work with the product management team closely, scope it down to a quick 1 month release. We got that release out, and it was a tremendous failure. Right? We saw that our operations teams were confused, our support teams were confused, and what we realized was that our business did not have its act together. Right? There were two different groups within our company who were not really talking to each other. So we were able to cut our losses short. I will not go into very specific because I'm not at a liberty to do so. But needless to say, that process was a classical example of where we were actually able to pivot in a very large organization. But we were able to do this because our CEO was supportive of it. The CEO of my division was supportive of it. And he was okay with getting a minimal product out there to a select set of physicians and see how the outcome would be, right? So we were able to do some of that work working very closely with our engineering organizations, right? So hopefully those two examples give you an idea here, Rohit.
Thanks, Yogesh. The next question is by Ashwin. He's saying, when you are building products for Indian business, when you listen to them, they want a great product but not ready to pay right price, particularly for SaaS products for Indian MSMEs. Is it a wrong match?
That's a really good question, Ashwin. This is something that keeps coming up all over the place. Are Indian customers different? Are they averse to paying money to SaaS offerings? There are two examples I will give you. Okay, there is a beautiful use case that has come out in recent days. There is a gentleman by the name Girish Mathrubootham who has created a SaaS offering, and it's doing extremely well. Right? Not only is it doing well in India, but it's also doing well in Africa and some of our Far Eastern countries. Right? So there are examples where people are paying for using the SaaS offering that he has. He's got a SaaS CRM offering on SaaS. So go with the right product, people will definitely pay for it, right? Another example is within the NASSCOM's accelerator that we have a company called as Wysa, that is WYSA. Just yesterday, the founders, Ramakant and Joe Agarwal, were able to strike a deal with CVS Etna. So this is a software where it is a owl that comes out and helps people from stopping them from committing suicide. So it is a behavioral health product offering. They have been at it for like a few days. So what they did is they went with a freemium model. So the freemium model is very, very impressive because the free version helps their machine learning, their AI model be trained, because you do need a lot of data to train your ML AI model. So don't underestimate the power of giving it for free these days, especially given that many offerings are like targeting that ML AI space. Use that for training, and with the training that they were able to provide to that ML AI model, they're now monetizing that by taking that offering out and building partnerships with large organizations, right? So those are two examples that are right there. And by the way, Girish and a few folks, like in the Chennai area, they run an initiative called as SaaS Boomi, where you can go to those meetings. I think they may be running those virtually now, where they're happy to speak with you, and they're happy to counsel you. They're happy to provide further advice there as well, right? For those of you who are looking for any SaaS advice.
Thanks, Yogesh. So we have 3 more minutes left. So let's have another question quickly. Sujit has a question for you. How does your summary get translated for an MVP or prototype stage startup? How would you tweak your recommendations?
That's a really good question. So if I understand correctly, the question is like, okay, how do you come up with that MVP, right? The minimal viable product. So the first and foremost thing is to have your hypothesis. Like, what do you really want to achieve? Okay. And I'm going to tell you something that's totally cliche over here. You may already know this, but it is very, very difficult to implement it. You won't believe the number of times when I catch my product team going off in the wrong direction. Okay. An MVP of an aeroplane is a bicycle. An MVP of an aeroplane is not one of its engines. One of the engines would come under what project managers would call as work breakdown structure. It is one of the parts of an aeroplane. Don't build a part. That is not an MVP. Okay. If you want to build an MVP, build a cycle. Okay. And sometimes it doesn't have to be a scaled down version. You don't have to build a bicycle. You can build a small aeroplane. Okay. So there is no surefire, there is no chemical formula for coming up with an MVP. An MVP would, would be driven by the business model or the business idea that you want to validate. So unless I know specifics, I can't give you more details here, but I would strongly recommend partnering up with your engineering teams and coming up with a offering that you can test in the market. Just make sure you don't spend an enormous amount of time, okay? The MVP needs to be, just see if you can get it out within 1 month, maximum 2 months. If it doesn't go out faster than that, it is not an MVP. At some point, it is like it is actually a full blown product. At that point, you may as well build the product itself, right? Like you may go with the phase one of the product. So just be careful about how you approach MVP. Everyone talks about MVP. You will hear about MVP a lot, but not many people do or build an MVP well. I've not seen good MVPs getting built, guys. Okay, I'll be honest with you. Now, as far as getting feedback from the MVP, there are many things that you can do, but instrument it. Make sure that your prototype is screaming data. Okay, the web servers that it is sitting on, ensure that it is giving out a lot of data about what is actually happening. If needed, make sure that you have a big data infrastructure or an Amazon elastic computing type of a setup where all those logs are getting stored, but instrument everything. Make sure you get a lot of data out of it, and and from that point on, there is no chemical formula for, hey, here are the two metrics that you should listen to, right? Identify what it is that you're trying to optimize. If you're trying to get more revenue, understand what your revenue drivers are, and make sure you're instrumenting those revenue drivers coming out of your product. Okay.
All right, Yogesh, let's have this question by Avinash as the last question for this session. So here we go. If a customer is asking for something and they are ready to pay for it, but as a product manager, I'm not convinced, how shall we handle it?
Okay. The lure of money, right? Should I pursue my passion and become a photographer, or should I go and become a IIT engineer, right? That's from the movie Three Idiots, by the way. So you have a very difficult situation on your hand. Your sales is telling you something, right? And they want to cater to an immediate customer need, but you know that this is not the future, right, of where you really want to land. There is no easy formula to handle this particular situation. You need to keep your salespeople happy. Don't antagonize your sales team, okay? So unless I know more specifics here, I can't give you a lot of guidance. But my suggestion here would be, find a way to quickly give something to your sales team. It doesn't have to be great or anything, but please don't antagonize them, okay? Find a way to get them something that's in 1 month and make sure that they go away with it, right? But start coming up with your own idea. Don't get into a place where you don't have anything in hand, right? And telling no to the salespeople. This is where you have to be really smart. Make sure you have a good idea for where you think your product should go. And why don't you use that product idea that you have to validate against what your salesperson is trying to sell, right? At the end of the day, you still need to make sure you're in business. You don't want to get out of business, right? So there is a strategy that many people employ. They have a current product, they have an offering which is making money, your cash cow, right? You keep making minimum enhancements to your cash cow, right? But keep investing in your new product, which is going to be your future, right? Like that is going to be the big gross money earner like next year or like 2 years from now. So either have a cash cow that you're able to give to your salespeople, or find a way to quickly build something for your salesperson and make sure you are not getting on that wrong side. And team, I think we may be out of time here. I am normally pretty, I'm normally out there on LinkedIn. If you have more questions, feel free to ping me. I'm happy to speak with you offline as well. But back to you, Ankita.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Yogesh, for this enriching and insightful session. Be information rich, not data rich. Wow, great. Thanks, Yogesh. And for all of you, I will meet all of you on 26th of May with a super session on 7 habits of effective storytellers. For more details, please visit nascom.in/events. And as Yogesh said, that you can get in touch with him over LinkedIn. His credentials were mentioned on the emailer which I had sent with you, so that you can get in touch and have your questions answered, which we were not able to take up. Thank you, Yogesh. Thank you so much for your time and efforts.
Thank you very much, Ankita. And good luck to all of you budding product managers out there. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.